Everybody, thank you for joining the ACA Small Business Bootcamp. We will get started here momentarily. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining the ACA Small Business Bootcamp for this Tuesday, August 17th. I'm Robert Theobald, Small Business Ombudsman and Vice President of Small Business Services at the Arizona Commerce Authority. And we're excited to have you with us today. Got a great presentation in store. We're looking forward to it. We'd like to first start by thanking all our community partners. This is just a sample list of the 100+ community partners that we have that help with the bootcamp sessions. So the Small Business Bootcamp is designed to help support small businesses return from the COVID crisis stronger than ever. In conjunction with those community partners, it is a statewide initiative. And then the bootcamp has created a great resource collective and content library. So talking about the bootcamp website a little bit, this is the page that you went to register for today's session. You can also find the upcoming sessions on there as well. We've got a few weeks of upcoming sessions listed on there you can register for. And then in the middle of the website, you'll find the Resource Collective link. And the Resource Collective are the tools and guides that our community partners across the state have provided to support small businesses. There's a lot of great information on it they provided, and so take a look at that. Additionally, we have the small business content library, and this is a great unintended consequence. When we first started the boot camps, of course, we recorded every session, so those that couldn't attend the live session could go back and watch the recording. But now, after doing the boot camp sessions, the boot camps for well over a year, we've got 140+ recorded sessions available to go back and watch. And these are all webinars provided by experts, CEOs, and other people in their designated fields to help support small businesses. And so you can go back at any time, watch the different presentations under the archive section of the website. There's no cost, and you can, again, access all these expert presentations. Two other great tools that are available for small businesses and for everybody is the state's COVID-19 information and resource page, arizonatogether.org. And then the Arizona Commerce Authority set up the COVID-19 business resources website at azcommerce.com/COVID-19. And this website includes business guidance, financial guidance, and other great information and resources to help support businesses during this time. The ACA also has a number of programs to help support small businesses. So we have our small business services, our workforce division, and then our Arizona MEP, Manufacturing Extension Partnership. Another great tool that we have to help support people looking to start a business or expand and grow their business is the Small Business Checklist. And the Small Business Checklist is an online interactive resource that helps answer the commonly requested licensing, registration, and compliance information at the local, state, and federal levels. You can also find some business planning and procurement information, along with a lot of other great information related to starting your business. So jumping into some quick updates, the PPP loan forgiveness, the SBA has set up a portal that small businesses with loans under $150,000 can use to apply for forgiveness. Your lender does have to be part of this portal, but you can go on and find out if they are. We're going to post the links in the chat for this information, but we want to make sure everybody understands that you do have to apply for forgiveness of your PPP loan. We just had a special session last week to talk about the portal. That information is available on the website in the archive, so you can go back and review it. Another great resource available to small business is the Employee Retention Credit. We've done previous boot camp sessions on that, and we actually have another one coming up where we will discuss that as well, because it's a great opportunity for small businesses to access some additional funding. Quick note on the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant. If you know someone that qualifies for that program and they haven't applied, they need to get the application in. I believe the window, it's going to close on about the 20th of August. So it's just a few more days left to take advantage of that program. And then the Arizona Innovation Challenge application is still open to those startups and tech companies that want to apply for that business plan competition. So with that, let's look at some of the upcoming sessions that we've got. Today, we have the gaps, the space between where you are and where you want to be. On Thursday, we have talent acquisition strategies, which is the third part of a three-part series brought to us by the Society of Human Resource Management. And then next week, we have two kind of techie sessions, but they're very important to help your business grow and scale and drive business growth. And it's growing your small business with artificial intelligence and best practices for applying your CRM. And if you don't have a CRM, a customer retention management program, this one may be one you want to watch to learn about CRMs, how they work, and how you can utilize them to help your business. Again, Tuesday's session on artificial intelligence it's going to talk about some of the stuff that you can learn and leverage. If you've seen the commercials where it talks about IBM Watson, that's IBM's artificial intelligence program. There's lots of things small businesses can leverage, and businesses in general can leverage to take advantage of artificial intelligence to help grow your business. And so this is going to be an interesting session. I'm looking forward to it, so we can share that great information. So with that, we want to go ahead and turn the time over to our presenter today. We have David Rafidi. He's the owner of David Rafidi Coaching. He is an expert business coach. And so we are looking forward to his presentation today. So David, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and turn the time over to you.
Thanks very much, Robert. I appreciate that. And good morning, everybody. It's nice to meet you, even though I can't see you, but it's really nice to be here with you. Before I get into the presentation, just a couple of things. First of all, I'm going to apologize ahead of time for my allergies. So I may be clearing my throat or blowing my nose. I'll try not to do that. But they're really, it must be that time of year. So there's my apology ahead of time. The other thing I would say is before we get started, is have a pencil and paper ready, or if you're on a laptop or a tablet or something, there'll be a couple of spots in the presentation where you may want to write something down. So I'll clue you in on those and when we get there. So here's what we're going to do today and how we'll do it. So as I go, I want you to feel free to write questions into the Q&A, or if you have comments, put comments in the chat area, I think is okay. Mm-hmm. I'll respond to those. As I think that's being monitored. Is that right, Robert? I should.
Yeah. We'll keep an eye on the chat. If you have questions, we like the questions to go into the Q&A, and then we'll use the chat for responses or comments as well, so we can get some interaction and give an opportunity for the attendees to post that stuff up.
Thanks very much. And this will be more meaningful if it's more interactive. So there'll be feel free to ask whatever, and we'll deal with that as we go. So we're going to talk about 5 steps to closing the gap between where you are right now and where you want to be. And that could be in any area of life or business or your profession.
David, real quick, did you want to share your screen? Because we don't have your slide deck up yet.
Right. Thank you. Oops. No, I do not want to leave the webinar. You may want me to leave the webinar as we go, but I'm not going to. So how's that?
That looks good.
Okay. I think my contact info will be placed in the chat area towards the end there, and I'll talk a little bit more about that and why that's there. So what you're going to walk away with today is, first of all, understanding what a gap is in the context that we're talking about. So unless you're a dentist, when I say the word gap, you'll have something specific in mind. We're going to talk about what a gap is. You're going to have time, opportunity to identify some of the gaps in your business or personally that you want to close. And then we'll have some tools to be able to close the gap. So it's going to be a lot of information in a short period of time. Questions will come to your mind. Again, feel free to fire those away. So let's take a look at what we're talking about here. So what is a gap? The gap is just what that title said it was. It's the space between where. Did my screen change for you guys?
No, it did not. It's still on that main screen.
Let me try this again. Sorry about that. That didn't help, I'm assuming.
No, we still see the intro slide.
Oh, okay. Hey, no, that's not showing. Listen, I got to apologize for this. I'm going to try and talk and fix this at the same time. So, well, this is what I tell my clients and what I used to tell my staff all the time. There really is no such thing as multitasking. You can only do one thing at a time and think about one thing at a time, which is why perhaps this isn't working too well. So let me try that. So I'm going to close the screen. I mean, not the screen, but the PowerPoint. See, we had this working during the practice, didn't we?
And Faith can share her screen in the slides if you want, David.
Okay, well, that may be what we have to do. I apologize for that. Not sure what's going on. So Faith, are you sharing now?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I'm at the definition, which should be the next slide you're looking at there. So a gap is the space between where you are and where you want to be. And in the middle, in between those two places, is what I call the unknown middle. That is the journey to where you need to go to get that gap closed. So A and B come together. Now, everybody has gaps, and that's the next slide, I believe, Faith. So, nope, you got to go up a couple. Sorry. One more, the other way. One more. There we go. Okay, everybody has gaps, and whether it's gaps in your business, you want your business to grow. Whether it's gaps, personal growth, like physical, some of us are growing there when we don't want to. I'm not talking about that kind of growth. I'm talking about, wanting to get in shape and we're not where we want to be, or you want to close an emotional gap, or if you're a spiritual person, a spiritual gap. We have gaps in our profession. Perhaps you're looking for a raise or promotion or whatever the case might be. You may have some internal barriers that lead to gaps in relationships, whether it be at home or with friends or in your business, on your team, whatever that looks like. You might have gaps in your team and your team isn't unified. And there are, of course, external gaps, such as, you might not have the location you want for your business. Your marketing isn't what you'd like it to be. Your cash flow isn't where you like it. You've got, excuse me, gaps in your organization or in the number of employees, which a lot of businesses are struggling with right now, is getting enough people. And if you're in the restaurant business, I'm sure you're experiencing that. But I think everybody in the room right now will agree that gaps are just a normal part of life. You know, what we're talking about isn't new to any of us, unless we just love the status quo. But that doesn't last very long. So that's a little secret you probably experienced too. So gaps are a part of the human condition, really. And a lot of us don't take intentional steps to close the gaps for whatever reason. I mean, we may lack the information we need, or we focus on the wrong things to close the gaps, or we just think, you know, that's the way it is, and there's nothing I can do about it. I had a friend in high school who, when we were looking at things and we couldn't figure out what he would say to me, you know, Graffiti, the blue whale is the largest mammal on Earth, the largest animal on Earth, and it only has a throat about that big. You know why? Because that's the way it is, he would say. So if we think that our gap is a blue whale and that's just the way it is, we don't do anything about it. So gaps have a starting point. Now you can, if you don't mind switching slides, there you go. From A to B. And we're going to see that it's important for you to know what A looks like and what B looks like, and then how to get there. So I'll be using the road metaphor. But here's one thing we know for sure: even though the middle is unknown, we know it isn't a straight line. Like the road from A to B to close your gap is never a straight line. There are twists and turns and obstacles. Some are visible, some aren't, some are internal. And so we're going to take a look at what that looks like. So if this were a road trip, B would be your destination. And you know, on a road trip, you hit road work, and so you have to slow down. And sometimes to get from A to B, you have to slow down to speed up. You might stop at a rest stop on a road trip, and sometimes to get from A to B, you got to stop and refresh yourself and take stock of where you're at. And here's the big truth: you are a part of your unknown middle. And so we need to take that into account too. You will need to, and I need to, when I want to close my gaps. So there's reasons for gaps. And some are personal because of our personalities or the way we behave. Some are external and involve the environment that we live and work in, or both. Or we make bad decisions or wrong choices, or we communicate poorly, or our perception of ourselves and our environment and others is skewed for some reason. So to close those gaps, we have to identify why, and then we have to strategize to close. Now, all this is very doable. I want to give you an example. Long-term client now, but when we started a meeting together, we didn't know each other. And he's an entrepreneur. He's in the finance industry. And he was about in the middle of the pack of this organization that he would sell for. He was like a contractor. And so he wanted to move up to where he was getting the rewards in the top 5. So we started working together on the process of closing gaps. And the very next year, he made it in the top 10. The very next year, he was in the top 5. And after that, he was number 2. And he's been there since we started working together. Now, it's not magic. It's just working the process that I'm going to share with you. Now, there are 4 overarching principles that you have to keep in mind, in the back of your mind there, as we're talking today. So if you wouldn't mind showing the next slide, Faith, I appreciate it. Thank you. Number 1, you have to be intentional. So not taking intentional steps isn't going to close that gap for you. Secondly, you need a strategy with measurable action steps. Third, you need accountability. We all need accountability to make sure we're doing what we have to do. And then fourth, you have to be brutally honest with yourself if you want to close that gap. And you, as we move forward with the 5 steps, you'll get a better feel for why those 4 things are important. So 5 steps, and I'll spend more time on 1 or 2 than I will on others. So again, feel free to let the questions fly, and we'll go with what we got. And I'm going to try and leave some space afterwards for questions too. So step 1, understand where you are. So again, this can be in any area that I've mentioned already, and but it's important, whatever area or gap you want to close, that you have clarity on where you are, whether it's your business or profession or your personal life. If you're not clear about where you are, you're not going to have clarity on the gap that you want to close. Or you may know the gap, but you won't have clarity on that, on how to get there. So it's critical that you have a clear understanding, a detailed understanding of where you are. Now that's a layered step to do, and I'll address that in a few minutes. And here's why it's layered, because it doesn't just involve your environment. It doesn't just involve the immediate, what's going on immediately in your business, but it also involves you, as I mentioned before. So you're a part of the gap, and that must be considered as well. So I'm not talking about navel gazing, but an objective assessment of the part you play in the gap that you want to close. So like a road trip, like, you know where you're starting from. If you're at your house, you know your home in detail, and you know what the backyard looks like, you know the chips that are in the furniture, you know where the kids left you know, marks on the wall and the TV, or however old they are. Hopefully your adult child is doing those things, but if you have one. So you need to know where you're at as far as your business goes, or whether it's just a personal one. So it's also not just to know where you're at, but why you're there. And so to understand if the gaps are external or internal or both, and that's why you need to know the why. So you need to know the what, you need to know the why, you need to know whether it's internal or external, and you need to know your part in it. So it's easy to get overwhelmed with gaps because we have gaps in so many places, and some of them we don't even see. So I would say to you this, 2 things. Number 1, it's okay to be content with where you're at if you're doing everything you can do to be successful. But it's okay not to be satisfied, even though you're content. You want to move, again, unless you love the status quo, which doesn't last very long, you want to move your business forward. So, but you can't work on a bunch of gaps at the same time. So when I was, before I had my business and I was leading teams and so on, I would tell them that if you can accomplish 2 big yearly objectives, then you've done a lot in a year, because most of us lose focus, or the tyranny of the urgent pops in, and all kinds of things happen. So I'm going to suggest to you that you pick 1 gap, and if you have a lot of capacity, you think you can handle 2, then do 2. But if you do more than 2, for sure, you're going to get frustrated, and it's going to be hard to complete. So So you need this clear picture. Now, any questions or comments so far? I'll take that as a no. So here's a little exercise I'd like you to do, and this is where you might want to take some notes. So take a moment, and that'd be next slide, please, Faith. Thank you. So prioritize, and then write down a gap or two in your life or your business, wherever you want to close the gap. And just take a moment to write it down. So maybe something that's come to your mind as I've been talking, or you need to think about it a little bit, that's okay. I'll give you a few seconds. Okay, I'm just going to keep moving just for the sake of time, but after we're done, go for it. Okay, here's step number 2. You want to understand where you want to be. You must know exactly what you want point B to look like. So if you're going on a road trip and you're heading to Disney World, you probably looked it up online, you know the rides you want to go on, you know where you're going to stay, you know all those things. So you want to know exactly where you want to be. And again, clarity is really important here. And I mean, you need to know it well, and you need to know it in detail. You have to have that picture or vision, if you like, written down, and you need to visit it. So you think about 3 years. I'm not going to talk a lot about vision because I bet you're deluged with vision stuff. But there are a lot of processes that are available to help you walk through to figure out your vision, to have that snapshot of the future that you want your business and your life to look like. And if you haven't done that, I'm going to give you a question that you can ask yourself that'll get you started on that road. So here's the question. If you had a magic wand and you could wave that magic wand, and then all of a sudden you're 3 years down the road, what does your life and business look like? So if you can answer that question and answer it in detail, then you're going to know what you want B to look like. So that's going to be very important when we get to step 4. But right now, if you don't know what now, again, this is in regards to the gap that you want to close, not necessarily your overall vision for your business, but what does your life and business look like if you've closed that gap? So that's the context that we're working in here today. Questions, comments? That's kind of, again, it's simple, but isn't necessarily easy. So here's the next, take a moment in the process. So write down a short but detailed description of where you want to be with regards to the gap you want to close. And again, unless you're a dentist, you're going to have to think about this a little bit. Okay. So talked about where you're at, A, where you want to be, B. Here's step number 3. You have to understand yourself. And this is where brutally honest really comes in. And self-awareness is a key concept to closing gaps and a lot more. So this step could easily have been number 1, And I would normally, if I was just talking to somebody off on the street, I would say, hey, you got to, get a handle on who you are. But because of my coaching experience, usually this takes place after a few sessions in a coaching relationship, because you have to develop trust between the coach and the person. So I made this step number 3 because it's not always easy to take a hard look at yourself. The more objective that you can be about who you are, the greater your capacity for growth and change, and the more clarity you will have in steps 1 and 2, which we've talked about. And as a side benefit, the higher your emotional intelligence, which impacts all your relationships. So when you know yourself well, you're going to know your strengths, you're going to know your soft spots or weak spots. I like to call them soft because you can harden them. And you will know some of your internal barriers, if not all of them, or obstacles that hinder your success. So here's another important side. It's not really a side benefit, but it's a benefit of knowing yourself. And that is, if you know yourself well, you will know others much better than you do now. In addition, if you have an understanding of who you are, it will help you explain a big part of why you have some of the gaps you have. And it'll help you understand that why that we talked about, that you need to know to close the gap that you want to work on. Now, here's a sad truth, that if you are not self-aware, you're probably not very teachable, and it will be difficult for you to close the gaps that you want to close. So understanding yourself might be one of your gaps, because we all have blind spots. Can you hit the next slide, please, Faith? Oh, you don't have any weaknesses? Excellent, because we really only like to hire people with no self-awareness. So, when you go into interview, what would you say your biggest weakness is? Well, I don't have any, or I can't think of any. Always walk in with one. So there are assessments out there that can help you get a pretty good objective view of who you are. And it's not just, I'm not just talking about personality assessments. I mean, those are great. I'm certified in one myself, but I'm talking about really getting in on the inside and seeing why you do what you do, because our personalities are pretty much hardwired by the age we're of 6. There's some changes, by the time you hit age 50, but after that, you've heard the old saying, he's set in his ways or she's set in her ways. But behavior you can change, and you really can train an old dog to do new tricks. It requires, again, a process and a strategy, but you have to know what they are first. So understanding yourself is critical to this whole process. Questions, comments? Okay, so we're looking at the 5 steps to closing gaps in your work and your life. So understanding where you're at, understanding where you want to go, what that looks like at the end there, what that destination is, and understanding yourself. So number 4 is shape your perspective. So the closer your perspective is to reality, the healthier your journey is going to be. So you've heard the old saying, and it's true, perspective is reality. And what that's saying is your perspective is your reality, my perspective is my reality. And we can view the same event and have a totally different perspective on what happened. You know, if this were a live session, I would say, how many here have seen the movie Vantage Point? And I'd ask for a show of hands. If you haven't seen that movie, go to Netflix or wherever and watch it, because it's a beautiful visual of what different perspectives, how you can view the same event and everybody come to it with a different perspective. It's a great show, great movie. Highly recommend it. So, but the fact is there is an objective reality. And the closer your perspective is to that objective reality, the better able you're going to be to maneuver through that unknown middle to get from A to B on the gap that you want to close. So here's one of my weaknesses. My staff used to tell me, every staff I ever had tells me that I see the world through rose-colored glasses. So I'm one of those cups half full. I would say, like, oh, look at those cute little kittens over there. I'm going to go pet them. And they would say, no, don't do that. That's a pride of lions. So that's my perspective is skewed in a lot of ways if I don't have a lot of information. So if you go through steps 1 through 3, you will have a lot of information to shape your perspective in a much healthier way. So purposely, then, here's how you shape your perspective. Next slide, please. Okay, number 1, I call this a replacement principle. And I use it with salespeople. I word it a bit differently with them to move them past that initial downer after people say no, which everybody in sales experiences, of course. But recovery time's important. In this case, I would say this: think about what you're thinking about. So in other words, as you're looking at your gap and you want an accurate perspective of what that looks like, you already have, when we started this, you had a perspective on a gap if you identified one. Think about what you're thinking about. Then compare it to the information you now have. Now, you don't have it yet, but if you go through those 3 steps that I've talked about before this, you're going to have a lot of information to replace what you're thinking about with what you now know after going through those 3 steps. Now, my educated guess is, no, it's not a guess, really, it's a statement. If you go through those steps, I guarantee you that your perspective on the gap that you have is going to be different than it is now, because you'll have so much more information with which to view that gap. Now, perspective is the way that you and I see the world, right? We, generally speaking, it comes from our point of view. It's shaped by our life experiences, our values, the current state of mind we happen to be in, you know, the assumptions we bring to the table or into the situation, a lot of other things. But if you go through those 3 steps, and I really would encourage you to do that, you'll have very important information to apply to your perspective on that gap that you want to close. So our perspective is shapeable. Our perspective is movable. And if this is objective reality, this is our perspective, we can bring it closer to that objective reality with the information that we get from the first 3 steps. So, questions, comments?
So we do have a question, David, in the Q&A.
Okay.
It ties in right now. It says, what personality test do you recommend? I guess someone wants to identify their how personality can fit in it.
Well, I can tell you the one I use is head and shoulders above all the others. I'm kidding a little bit. I use DISC because it's been around for years and years. It's built on a lot of research that has gone on before, but there are a lot of good ones out there. I would say do your homework. And when you do your homework, read about what it provides for you, but also look at where you're getting it from. Because my recommendation would be wherever you get it from, make sure they will have someone available to coach you through it. So that would be really important. So do your homework. You know, I don't want to sound self-serving. I love DISC. I've been using it since the 80s. They built a lot more research has gone on since then as well. But again, there are a lot of good ones, several good ones. Google and do your homework, and you'll be very pleased that you've taken that step. Promise you. Anything else? I hope I answered your question. You could just throw yes in there. Or if another question has come to mind that, I didn't. Then,
Posted the link to the DISC profile in the chat, David.
Okay. Terrific. And there's some good organizations out there that'll coach you through it as well, too. And I'd be happy to as well. So, anything else? That's it. Next slide, please. So take a moment. So this is obviously going to take longer than a moment, but follow this process. So brainstorm with yourself and write down words that describe how you see the gap you're working to close. Now, if you're closing a gap in your business and you have a team or a partner or somebody, brainstorm with them. That's a great way to go. 2, circle the words that seem to show a pattern as you write down those words. And then write a sentence or 2 description, including the circled words, of course, of the gap you are closing. And I think if you go through this exercise, you will see how different your perspective is now after having gone through these 4 steps than it was when you first started looking at the gap, when we first started talking. Okay, step number 5. Strategize on closing the gap. So the gap, the plan to close the gap is the roadway to get you to your destination. A is where you're starting. B is your destination, and the strategy you put together to get there is the roadway. Now, I'm going to answer a question that hasn't been asked. You're probably looking at, and I've got more to say about this, but you're looking at these steps and you're going, those aren't new to me. And they probably aren't, but it's the sequence, again, that's important in being able to close the gap. So now, having gone through steps 1 through 4, you have enough information to begin taking those steps to close the gap or gaps that you have chosen to close. And again, I would recommend don't do more than two. If you have a lot of capacity, do two. And if you close them, excuse me, work on something else. Pick another gap to close. So again, I'm not talking about short-term goals. I'm going to talk about that in a second. I'm talking about an overall strategy to close the gap. Now, here's a good tip. Start with step number 2 and work your way backwards. That way, you will have a better perspective on what you have to do to close that gap. So the question is, though, how will you close the gap or the gaps? What are the plans or the action steps that you're going to design to close that gap? So after you've gone back to step number 2, which you've written out in detail, you can break it apart. So it was a 3-year, I gave you 3 years. Some gaps are going to get closed a lot sooner than that. 3 years is a long-term thing. Don't worry about how much time, but there is time involved, which I'll talk about in a second. So what you need to put in place is SMART goals. So you've all probably heard the term SMART goals. Next slide, please, Faith. Thank you. So SMART goals are specific. So I'm going to go to the moon in 2023. They're measurable. How am I going to know I made it? Well, I'll know because I'm on the moon. They're achievable. Well, now we're getting a little bit tricky. I know you can get to the moon. The question is, can I afford to get to the moon? And based on the prices the way they are now, to go up in space, it's not likely. So it's probably not a good goal. Relevant. Well, if I want to close the gap between me and my partner, going to moon probably isn't going to help. My partner may be glad I'm on the moon, but it isn't going to close the gap. And then lastly, you need a due date. It's got to be time bound. I'm going to accomplish this goal. I'm going to get to the moon 2023. So these are short-term goals to get you to your objective, which will get you closer to closing that gap, whatever your gap looks like. Questions on that? Again, that's nothing new. We're probably all aware of how to form objectives, how to come up with actionable steps, action steps to get there. And that's where accountability is important, because if you don't have accountability, someone to spur you on to accomplish the goals you've set for yourself, to close that gap, then it's easy to get distracted. So remember, and this next slide, please. You can't eliminate time from the process, but you can sure shorten it by taking those 5 steps that I've mentioned to you. So again, I want you to look at that unknown middle line. You're gonna run into things. Life happens. Things happen in business. COVID happens. We all know about things can happen in business, which will cause you to detour or change directions, or go around in circles for a little while, or stop at a rest stop and just refresh yourself. So know that ahead of time, because it takes time to maneuver through all those things. But if you know where you're at, if you know where you want to go, what that looks like. If you have, if you know yourself and the part you play in that gap, and your perspective, you have the right perspective, a closer perspective to reality, you can strategize in a way that will shorten that time. Now, it takes time to go through those steps too, I will add, because again, they're simple, but they're not always easy to go through. So, but I guarantee you, if you go through them, you're going to close the gap that you want to close. And that accountability, again, is critical because you need perseverance to accomplish those things and to stick to it. So now I know I've given you a lot. And first of all, let me say, are there any questions?
Hey, David, we do have a really good question from Tanya. It says, how can I change my perspective? My gap feels like the Grand Canyon. I'd like to move my business from just selling at farmers markets to retail.
Yeah, great question. Well, first of all, you need to go through those 3 steps of knowing where you're at, knowing where you want to go. So you want to go to retail. I would write that down in detail. Here's where I want my store. This is the location. This is what I want it to look like inside. This is what I will look like when I have that retail store. This is how many employees I'm going to have. So, write that down in detail, know where you want to go, figure out who you are, know yourself well. And then, so if you've gone through those 3 steps, then when it comes to shaping your perspective, you've got a lot of info, a lot of information on changing your perspective, having gone through those 3 steps. So again, I would suggest the replacement principle. So when you look at that gap, you have a picture of what that looks like in your mind, I'm pretty sure. Think about what you're thinking about. In other words, whatever thought you're having about that gap, just stop. Stop, hold that thought right there and compare it to what you've learned about where you want to go and who you are. And then once you've done that, if that thought doesn't match up, get rid of it, toss it out, and replace it with the good info that you have already. Does that help? I hope. You can't avoid the steps, and the replacement principle will really help you shape your perspective. You got to be intentional, and having help doesn't hurt. Accountability is good.
There's a question just popped into the chat. Just a comment from Michael about great question. He wants to do the same. So appreciate that. And Tanya said, yes, that answered her question. So
good.
Excellent. Any other questions we've got out there? We've got a couple minutes left that we can take advantage of having David here with us. So please ask a question or two and we can answer that. I like to look at, if you don't have that vision of where you want to go, you don't know where you're going.
Yeah, exactly. You'll get there. Nowhere.
You'll get somewhere.
Yeah. I would say this too. I know I've given you a lot, and including the steps and the work involved. If you have questions or you want a little help or whatever, contact me. I'll be happy to have a conversation with you. And they're going to put my contact info in the chat area. And just however you do it, If I don't answer the phone right away, it's my business phone. I'll leave a message, I'll get back to you. And the first 5 I can do this week for sure. After that, it'll be next week or thereabouts. So
Excellent. We had another, Faith just posted your contact information, so that's great. We had a great question come through. And it's from Suzanne. It says, would you include professionals like accountants in your goal planning?
yes, if you need them. Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of resources out there. I would recommend the Bootcamp, the resources there. Small Business Development Center, the Arizona Small Business Development Center is another great resource to get meet the needs you have. So yeah, that and any other expertise you need to bring into your goals, I would certainly include that.
Excellent, thank you. Well, with that, we will go ahead and wrap up. Wait, we might have one more. Oh, it says, you have one. It says, when working from A to B, if you have people involved that do not buy in, would you be better off severing those relationships?
Well, that depends. If it's part of your team, I would say catch my team webinar. No, I'm not just kidding about that, but there are ways to bring your team along. If you're talking about people outside of your business, it depends who they are. You know, in my view, it takes a lot to break a relationship. You might disagree, agree to disagree. That is a conflict resolution, and still be friends or whatever the relationship is. I would say that if they're holding you back, that might be another conversation.
Excellent, thank you. That was a good question. So with that, we'll wrap up. We're right at the top of the hour. We appreciate, David, for your time and your presentation. Great information. I hope everybody can take a piece back and identify some of those gaps in your business that you want to overcome and apply some of these techniques. And so with that, we'll wrap up the day. We hope everybody can join us on Thursday morning, 9 a.m. for our next session. Until then, everybody have a great and safe day, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Robert. Thank you, Faith. And thank you, everybody. Been a pleasure.